Okay, we still have a few more people joining as we go along, but let's make a start. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Welcome to the latest in our series of Tech Tuesday briefings. In this case, we are going to be talking about one of the staples of the EDAC range, the Card Edge connector. This is a product that EDAC has been well known for decades. And in fact, as we go through the presentation, you'll see some of the green connectors. That green color has been synonymous with EDAC for a long time. So in terms of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to look at Card Edge, and we're going to talk a little bit about how they work and what they are. That will lead us on to the key features, the things that make them a little bit different to conventional connectors. And there are some key differences that really work to their advantage, which will then lead us on to the question of why Card Edge? Why do people still continue to use Card Edge connectors when there are so many alternatives available? And then we'll touch at the end about possible applications in industries, the kind of jobs that people are using Card Edge connectors to do. So let's get started with talking about what a Card Edge connector is. And the name is, to a certain extent, in the description. It is a connector that uses the edge of a card, in this case a printed circuit board, a card, as part of the connector system. And the products that you see there on the screen are PCB mounted board-to-board connectors, and the card slots straight in. And the key difference there is that it is a single part connector. It's not conventional two-part connector, and we'll get onto that in a moment. But it should be a familiar piece of technology to many of us. If any of us have ever played with computers, if we've taken the case off an old desktop computer and looked at the memory cards that go into it, they use Card Edge connectors for their connectivity to the motherboard. This picture here is a Nintendo 64 game cartridge. And for those of us of a certain generation who grew up with this kind of technology, we'll be familiar with Card Edge connectors because the game cartridges actually used just the PCB into an edge card as their connector. So this should be a familiar technology to many of us, but if it's not, we'll run through and we'll give you an idea of exactly what these things can be used for and why they are so useful. And let's contrast them with a conventional connector. This is one of the push-pull connectors from MH that we talked about a couple of months ago. And the key feature here is that this is a two-part connector system. And the vast majority of connectors in the world are two parts. So whether that's a pin and a socket, a plug and a receptacle, a male and female, however it's phrased, the vast majority of connectors in the world are two-part. They connect two electric circuits together, and you've got a connector on each end that allow you to govern how that connects together. Well, that's great, and for many applications, a two-part connector is a perfect solution. But a Card Edge connector is a one-piece solution. So the picture here, the part that goes onto the motherboard, and we'll talk about motherboards and daughter boards just as a way of describing the orientation, but in fact it's far more complex than that. But if we talk about the motherboard or the main board, this is the part that sits on the main board. The card that goes into it simply has a series of pads that connect up with the contacts in this connector. And that's one of the things that makes them different to conventional two-part connectors. You don't need a second part number to provide this interconnect system. And we talked about motherboard and daughter board, or main board and daughter board, but we've got a situation where these things can be used in a number of orientations. A backplane device might have a board with cards coming into it at right angles. We also have situations where cards need to be parallel to the main board. We also have some applications where boards need to be mounted edge to edge. And the Card Edge connector provides a solution for all of those. And we've got options that cover all of that type of arrangement. So it's a very versatile product. And when we talk about the card that goes into the edge card connector, this is what we're talking about. This is a memory card from a computer, and you can see on the bottom edge here, instead of a conventional connector with a plastic insulator and a whole series of contacts, we have a number of pads that are mounted straight onto the printed circuit board itself. And this is the part that interfaces directly into a card edge connector. That's what makes this so useful. And we'll talk about why that's convenient and why that's suitable for many applications in a moment. But let's talk for a second about exactly how it works. So let's imagine the grey board on the left here is the main board. The green connector with its gold contacts are mounted onto that printed circuit board. And then the grey card that's coming in from the right, that's our daughter board. That's our secondary board that we're trying to plug in. And simply, as you insert that card into the connector, it displaces the contacts within the edge card, and that's what provides the link between the connector and the card. Now, we've shown here a two-row system with a contact on both sides. There are types of edge card connector that only have contacts on one side. Both are equally valid, and there are lots of different ways of doing that and creating this arrangement. And because of the versatility of the edge card connector, this picture just simply shows you some of the features that can change. It's not one solution fits all. It's not a case of one plug rules them all. We have so many different options that make this versatile. The pins can be single row or double row, as we've talked about. The pitch, the distance between pins can be smaller or larger, depending upon the application. The insulator, the green insulator around the outside, can have different mounting holes. It can have different accessories. The tails that go into the printed circuit board can be straight through, can be surface mount, can be, in this case, long tail for wire wrap. There's a lot of different solutions, and because this connector has been around for some time, those options are all available and are still very much in use by many people. So let's start talking a little bit about why people use card edge and why it remains relevant, even though it's a 40, 50, 60-year-old connector. And one of the key reasons we've already touched upon is that it is a single part. There are a handful of card edge connectors that have a two-part system, but for the moment, we'll concentrate on this, the single piece connector. These are three different examples that might be mounted onto a printed circuit board, and the buyer, the purchasing team, only needs to buy one connector to make this connection. That simplifies the situation enormously, and it's a very powerful argument from a logistic and from a purchasing point of view about why card edge is suitable. The cost of purchasing is key because we are removing the need to hold more than one part number. We can simplify stock holding, we can reduce the capital that customers need to have on their shelves. So this picture here shows a printed circuit board with a number of different connector technologies, and we can see the sheer variation of all of these different types down the right hand side here, with a plug and a socket, a PCB mounted socket, and maybe a cable mounted plug, or we could have board to board connections. Instead here, the green connector, and in fact this white connector as well, these are card edge solutions. So you can see it is just one connector on the board with the card plugging straight into it. That simplifies things enormously when it comes to logistics and purchasing. It also simplifies things quite a lot when it comes to the actual assembly and manufacture of the printed circuit board. Printed circuit boards nowadays are incredibly complex, and for every component that you need to mount on the board, it's additional processing cost, not just in terms of the components, but in terms of the time and the expertise of putting it onto the board. So not only are we saving the customer money because they only have to buy one part, we're saving them time and energy when it comes to actually processing and assembling the board with this edge card connector on it. And it also helps in a slightly more abstract way, something we need to talk about. So I'm going to present a hypothetical situation for you where we have a customer who produces a device. Let's say it's a handheld instrument for measuring things like groundwater in the building industry. The main board of that component has all of the functions on it, but maybe it needs to be modified for different markets. And we've got here 6 examples where that card needs to be modified for different voltage levels that are supplied by local markets. They have to conform with local regulations, local safety compliance. For whatever reason, that one card needs to be modified ever so slightly for different customer types, different customer regions. Well, that makes processing that little bit more difficult because every time that the manufacturer here, the customer, needs to create a new batch of boards, they might need to modify their process to accommodate the board for one particular region or another. Well, the ideal would be, let's do away with that and let's just produce one card for the whole world with all the same features, and that means you could build in quantity. The economy of scale comes in, and we've got one type of card that can be made many times. But you still need to modify that board for the different regions, and that's one of the areas that an edge card connector comes in. With a small edge card connector on this board, and then a small module that can convert the board for the local market. Maybe it's a voltage regulator, maybe it's a safety device to comply with local regulations. That card can be inserted very quickly, and instantly that board has been converted for use in one market or another without having to change the manufacturing process of the main board. So we talked about processing and just the number of components that need to go onto the board, but it's a little bit more involved than that, because we have a solution here in the edge card connectors that simplifies the adaptation of a standard printed circuit board for a different purpose, whether that's a different region, a different voltage, whatever it happens to be. And there's one other thing that we need to think about, especially when we're looking at purchasing and the logistics of connectors. We've seen some very strange times over the last 5 years, what with pandemics and the collapse of the air freight industry, and then a single event in the Suez Canal, as this picture shows, had great implications and huge knock-on effects for global trade. Getting hold of components is one of those headaches that every manufacturer has to cope with. And we've seen plenty of examples where these disruptions have caused customers problems. If you have a two-part connector, you need to get hold of both parts. And if one all of a sudden isn't available, can't get hold of it, it's delayed, simply replacing that part isn't as simple as finding an alternative from another manufacturer. There's all sorts of issues of compatibility and all sorts of regulations that might need to be involved. So changing connectors halfway through a production run can cause huge problems. Well, with a card edge connector, because it's just the one piece, that simplifies this problem enormously. By only needing one type of product, one connector, to join these two cards together, we are simplifying that supply chain problem and easing people's minds when it comes to questions like, how much longer am I going to be able to get hold of this product? Where's my next supply coming from? Do I have enough stock? So there are lots of commercial and processing reasons why card edge is so very useful. But let's move from that and talk about the technical side of the connector, because it still remains a very capable connector, and there are lots of reasons why people continue to use them. One of the first things to say about card edge connectors is that they are very robust. So here is a board. This happens to be a Raspberry Pi Pico. It's one of the smallest single board computers that we can find nowadays. But this has many things in common with some of those additional boards that we've been talking about, in that it has pins. It has a connector on the edge with all of these contacts that need to be used to connect with another board. Well, those contacts are a little bit vulnerable. You can see from them, they stick out. A little bit of damage, a pin gets bent or a pin gets broken, and all of a sudden this entire computer, this entire device can no longer be used. And so we need to be very careful when plugging in this type of board. We need to make sure that they're very well aligned and that the pins are not bent, because we have the potential to cause enormous problems. Well, a single part connector, like a card edge, does away with that. Instead of pins, we have all the pads that are lined up on the edge of the printed circuit board. And you can see from this image, there's nothing sticking out. There's no vulnerable pins that can get bent or broken. The pads are form actual part of the board itself. That makes it a lot more robust. If we go back to the image that we talked about earlier on, and the cartridges that people used for Nintendo type devices, that was one of the key features. Because you've got people who aren't necessarily trained using connectors, plugging these modules into their game console, the use of individual pins is a recipe for potential disaster. If they get broken or bent, then there's all sorts of problems with returns and warranty and reliability. By using a card edge solution, we've done away with that, and it simplifies the connection process enormously. We can also help with the design of the connector itself. If you look at the ends of the connector where the board goes in, you can see that there's an angled piece, a lead in. It means that connecting the board, there's a little bit of tolerance in terms of misalignment. It's far more robust when it comes to placing the connector into the card, placing the card into the connector in a blind situation, or where visibility is a little bit more limited, or where there might be a bit of movement involved. It makes it a very robust solution. It also allows for, we talked about misalignment in an axial term. This, you see this image where the board is being removed almost like a door handle. This is called zippering. And a card edge connector is more tolerant of that kind of abuse than a conventional pin and socket type arrangement. So the card edge is a very reliable solution, not least because of the wiping type contacts. The wiping contact onto the surface of the printed circuit board is self-cleaning. It means that dust and contamination can be wiped out of the way during that mating process. Everything we've talked about here builds the reliability of the connector itself. But there's also some other benefits that this connector type provides. We talked about mating cycles, talked about reliability. Some of these card edge connectors can provide up to 500 mating cycles. And if we're looking at going again back to the game cartridge, where we have a device that might be plugged in and out multiple times, that kind of mating cycle reliability is hugely beneficial to designers. Because of the design of the contact, there's a large surface area between the contact and the pad on the board, and that gives us superior current rating. Some of the products that we've got here can be doing up to 5 amps per circuit. So we've got a very capable connector, both in terms of reliability and in terms of its electrical characteristics. They are superior for things like shock and vibration, again, because of the design of the pin itself. And with the right materials, some of the high temperature versions can do up to 125 degrees C, making them suitable for industrial and potentially even some defense type applications. So card edge isn't just a way of saving money or simplifying board construction. It is a technically capable and very relevant product for lots of customers. But there are still a few more advantages. One of them is size. Connectors have got to the point where they are now one of the largest components that go onto any printed circuit board. Everything else has got smaller. Microprocessors, discrete components, passives have all become smaller. And now we have a situation where a conventional connector might actually be the very largest component on any printed circuit board. And this image shows that perfectly. We've got a board here with all sorts of components on, but in fact the connector that sits at the edge of the board here is the largest part on that board. It limits the stacking distances that you're going to be able to use. It limits the number of cards that you can get into a given space. And by replacing this connector with the pads for a card edge device, you're making the whole thing slimmer and you're making the whole board smaller. So there are advantages when it comes to mechanical design as well as the electrical performance of a card edge type. And this image then kind of solidifies that idea. Again, this is another memory card device that will go into a computer. And we can see the connector pads here, the pads that go into the edge card, they are not intruding on the board area. They are not making the board thicker. The largest components are actually the memory devices, which is the right way it should be. So this allows for a very compact board and a very compact device overall. So the mechanical characteristics of this are superior to many types of board-to-board connector that you might find in everyday use. They allow things like flexible design. Printed circuit boards nowadays are getting more complex, and people are starting to design on both boards. Well, it's been a trend that's been going on for some time, especially with surface mount technology. Designers can now put plenty of devices on both sides of the printed circuit board, making the whole board smaller. But again, the connector, if there needed to be one, would be one of the largest components on there. Well, with an edge card and putting the pads on the edge of the board, you can put them top and bottom because you can have a dual row edge card connector for it to plug into. Again, we are enabling a very much more compact design for those designers, making everything smaller. So hopefully this will give you an idea of some of the capabilities that EdgeCard brings to designers. We can go a little bit further as well. They are easily customized. This, for example, is an example. This is an image taken from a video, and after we finish the recording, I will go into a little bit of detail and we'll add some details to the recording when we put it on YouTube. There are lots of videos that EDAC have created showing how edge card connectors are used in the real world, and it gives you a far better an explanation than maybe that I might be able to come up with of how these things work. But just to give you an example, at the top here we have a card with lots of notches cut into it, and we have some guide pieces here inserted into the edge card that prevent the whole board being plugged in the wrong way round. It also, if we had a number of card connectors put next to each other, we could almost code each one of the connectors so that the wrong board could not be plugged into the wrong socket. So it's a very easily customized device and makes it suitable for many different applications. And that can go together with the range of accessories that are available. We've talked about so far just the connectors that go onto the printed circuit board, but there are guides, there are mounting devices that allow these to be mechanically secured to the board. The guides help keep the board aligned, the daughter card aligned with the contacts, and make sure that they mate correctly, and just as important, are removed correctly. So with the technical capabilities of the board itself, of the card itself, and the connector that goes with it, with the commercial advantages of having one part rather than two, and the logistical and processing reduction in demands that a one-part connector will provide, hopefully you can see that card edge remains a very, very relevant solution for many industries. So let's just take a quick look at some of the areas that card edge connectors have been used and continue to be used across industry today. So these three images are three typical applications for card edge that have been in use for many years. The example I gave earlier was a handheld device for monitoring groundwater, and on the right hand side we've got a perfect example of that, where we've got a handheld device that can be tailored for a specific application with the use of a daughter card that goes into it. On the left there, we've got robotics and medical applications. And again, card edge connectors allow a huge amount of versatility and adaptability in many devices. And that gives us an excellent opportunity to use this card edge device in industrial applications. But let's bring some of these applications up to date. Card edge connectors have been used in computing for years. They have been a standard memory connector, and modern communication systems, PCIe Gen 3 and above, have used card edge connectors for some of the latest high-speed applications. So this isn't an old connector that is no longer relevant. They are still being used in some of those advanced computing devices at the moment. And so the image on the left is just an example of a data center of where these things will be used in bulk. But beyond that, the top right, we've got an image of renewable energy. Lots of new industries that are coming out or are maturing at the moment. Renewable is just one of those that is coming, are rediscovering the benefits of a card edge type device. And you will continue to find people using these products, whether it's UAVs and drones, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's deep sea exploration. There are lots of applications that you might not originally think of that can use this type of connector and can use them in modern applications and devices. Well, card edge is important. We'll talk about EDAC and the MH range. EDAC has been a card edge manufacturer for many years, and it continues to manufacture card edge. We've got something like 500,000 different part numbers already in existence for card edge connectors, and they can be customized. They can be made into something special for a customer, as we mentioned earlier. So card edge is a key part of the EDAC range, but we do have a number of other connector types that will be complementary, that go with it. This is an expanded version of the image that we saw earlier, and this just gives you an example of many of the connectors that are available, from board-to-board connectors, board-to-wire. We have card edge, we have standard pin and socket type arrangements, we've got rack and panel. There are lots of different products within the MH range, the EDAC MH range, including networking and RJ45 type devices. So EDAC has a range of connector solutions. Card edge is simply one of them, and we can provide a number of different ways of integrating those together. Just to give you a better idea of the product range overall, here is the individual ranges broken down, and you can see some very familiar products along with some of the newer types, the magnetic pogos, which will be subject of a Tech Tuesday very soon, and the push-pull connectors that we talked about a couple of months ago. So EDAC is a manufacturer with a broad range of products, all designed for the industrial users, with excellent support to be able to help customers design with these products. And if we talk about support, here are the contact details of your normal business development manager, peoples across Europe. Please feel free to reach out to your local person and ask further questions. If you have any questions as a result of the presentation today, we haven't done the standard Q&A. We would ask you, if you have any questions, please do reach out to us. Use these contact details, make a point of getting hold of us and asking the question. We will get back to you. And we will also, once the recording is completed, we will post this video on YouTube so that you can go back and look at some of the details again if you need to. So that concludes the presentation for today. Thank you so much for joining us for our latest Tech Tuesday. We will be holding another one at the beginning of July. I believe the subject is Pogos. I will double check, but you will receive some communication from us inviting you to the next Tech Tuesday, where hopefully we can give you more in-depth information into one of the products that makes EDAC product range so useful. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.